For tonight's talk, we have as Alma said, the initiator of this exhibition, Francesco Bonami, who's if you allow me to say, a curator in the full extent of the word. Someone who has worked for institutions, who's done small and large-scale projects. He was the curator of the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art. He curated the 50th edition of the Venice Biennial. He's been the editor of Flash Art. He's done so much around the field, and yet he seems to have a persisting interest in making these smaller, more intimate, and more personally motivated, I think, exhibitions. So we're very privileged to not just see his show here, but actually hear his thoughts about what's on display tonight. And with us, so kindly joined Jake Chapman, who's been, for the past nearly 30 years, working in collaboration with his brother, Dino's, and best known to us as the Chapman brothers, whose work, so befittingly to what we're going to look and talk about today, really deals with very, very problematic subject matter. And often puts on the table things that we feel very awkward or very difficult to examine and to think about as aesthetic objects, as objects of that point to how our moral compass operates and works. And we were very, very lucky to have both of you here tonight joining and agreeing to speak about the show a bit. I'm not going to say much more, but to start with, I'd like to ask you, Francesco, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about this project, about the show, how it came about,
Well, actually, the exhibition, good evening. Actually, the exhibition came out visiting a show that Jake and Dino had here, Blaine Southern, or South Blaine, I don't remember. It was this beautiful exhibition, and the central piece, there were different casted bronze suicide vest, and I was looking at them, and I thought about, immediately come to my mind, Pascali. If Pascali would have been English, it would have been Jake and Dino's Chapman, I think, because there is this mutation of the arts and craftsman into a suicide bomber, you know? And British artists are more suicidal than Italian, and that's why he did a cannon with wood and they did a suicide vest. And so it came this idea, and I started thinking about Pascali, and then now I don't remember how I connected to Flavin, but I thought that Flavin was someone that, you know, he lacked total irony, like most American minimalists. They have no irony about their work. But there was a similarity to Pascali. At the other side of the Atlantic, they were looking at ways to create a new reality through normal object, and that's come the word hardware. The Sublime, Yuval put the Sublime into the, I think the original title was another one, but then he had Sublime, and in fact it makes more sense. And then reading about Dan Flavin, I found out that also, like all the conceptual and minimal artists, they're all frustrated painters. In fact, he loved the work of John Friedrich Knesset, 1854 landscape and luminous artist, American, that very few people knew about it. And so Alma struggled very much to find a painting by him. It's not easy to have it. I mean, they are around, but people seem not to want to lend it, particularly in a show like this, because they don't understand. They can, or to me, because they know that I always do some damages to them. Yeah. I repaint them or something. And so we found it, and so the show is completed. It's a small shows, but I think it's very well balanced. And then, of course, there is Henri Sala video that I knew since a long time. This work is when the show will be completed. I mean, after the talk, you can listen to it. It's a guy making the noise of the bomb during the Balkan Wars. You know, so it's the memory of the artist. So it also was very much simple hardware. You know, the voice of a person just making the noise of a very lethal tool that is a bomb. And so the show was simple and completed like that, and here we are.
So I suppose my first thing that I wanted to ask, the first thing I wanted to ask both of you was there's a little bit of a sense of discomfort when you enter the gallery, I think, when noticing this giant real size cannon from the war and this sort of monument. It's actually called a monument for Vladimir Tatlin, who built or planned to build this giant monument after the October Revolution in 1917, and made these sketches and a model for a monument that was supposed to be built in St. Petersburg and be even larger than the Eiffel Tower, and would be sort of a center of communism after communist revolution. And it seems that sort of Flavin comes and referenced this giant, enormous, important monument that was never built with fluorescent lights. And then you have Pino Pascali, who's using scrap wood to make this replica of a life-size cannon. Are they joking? Is it meant to be funny? Is it meant to be cynical? Is it meant to be serious? I mean, there's something very painful about a cannon from Second World War just decades after.
I think that's a question that goes perfectly for Flavin and Pascali and for Deca Giuseppe. Are you joking?
Yeah.
You know?
No,
I will. I'll be joking in a minute. Yeah. Well, I guess that there's a kind of an implicit joke in the relation between two words, sublime hardware, because one is ethereal and one is quite material. And I guess that the thing about Flavin sort of trying to construct a work of art that somehow resembled or had some relationship to another artist's work that had an ostentatious intention to build something which was kind of beyond the material means. And that there's something quite interesting about that Flavin has the audacity to title his work after Tatlin and produce something which is so impoverished by its means. You know, that there's something, not just least in terms of its actual materiality, but in terms of its aesthetic effect, because actually it's immaterial, it's light, it's ethereal, it has no chauvinistic matter to it. So it's kind of something there and not there. And the Pascali thing, the idea of producing something like a cannon, you know, which has a kind of a maximal effect. A cannon blows things up. You know, it has a kind of a huge, devastating effect on matter. And this thing has been constructed by impoverished means. So they're both anecdotally punching above their weight. You know, so aesthetically there's a kind of, but I'm not sure if those things are just reducible to sort of a joke. I mean, there is a kind of an irony involved, but I think it's in a sense, I imagine that, you know, if you wanted to take a metaphysical position about what they're doing, you would say, well, that's how they're creeping up on their poetics, you know, rather than sort of kind of, you know, head on, that they're kind of creeping up from the behind. You know, there's the joke, that's the punchline.
I suppose but Francesco, you've mentioned earlier to me that you don't think that Dan Flavin had even a tiny bit sense of humor in making these works, that he was taking them very seriously.
I never knew him. I never had lunch with him or breakfast, so I have no idea if could have had any sense of humor. I doubt it highly.
No, it's interesting.
Definitely, Pascali had sense of humor, but that's a particular side of Italian artists in general. They have sense of humor. They take themselves very seriously, but they force themselves into be ironic or humor, almost, you know, you see the picture of Pascali with the helmet next to the thing, it looks like very funny, you know, it looks like he's making fun of his own work, he's playing. So it's more of a big toy, that thing, than a sculpture in a way, because there is always this fear on behalf of Italian artists to have both shoes, two foot in one foot in two shoes. I don't remember. Well, you know, you want to be serious, but also you don't want to be taken too seriously. You want to have a retreat path where if they say, "Are you joyous?" You don't take yourself so seriously. You say, "No, I wasn't taking myself so seriously. Actually, I was playing." So there is always this thing. While Flavin, actually, I mean, I imagine if you would suggested he was joking, he would get very mad, you know. So there's this completely different approach, and
don't you think the work would completely tear itself apart if there was any sense of irony in it? Because it has to have that sort of, you know, it has he has to flatten out the idea that there's any kind of intention in the work as well. It has to be kind of schematic and procedural, doesn't it? So that he's...
If that was being by an Italian, it would have fall apart.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Both technically then aesthetically, no, they would have put a little heart or something,
But I guess it's like, you know, I suppose that you've got, you know, if you have some idiot comes up and says anyone could do that, I could have done that, and you're an artist who has done that, you either have you know, you can either choose to engage and explain why, or you can just sort of be reconciled with the idea of saying that's not your job. But in some senses, if you indulge the question that it's not permissible as a work of art, then you're having to see your own work as being ironic, as being something funny, you know. So I guess, you know, it's either or, and especially if you're a kind of, I guess, a Protestant, uptight American, then, you know, you're not going to.
I think,
you know. Yeah, I think that a person that is not involved in this kind of language could tell you that they could have done it, but that's, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
But the point is, I could have done your work, but I didn't.
Oh, she did.
So that's a problem. You know, I think that goes back to the. I wrote an entire book about this thing of saying I could even do it, but you didn't do it. And I end the book saying you could have wrote this book, but you didn't, and that's too late. So when the moment you say I could have done it, it's too late.
Yeah. No, but I'm not in any sense.
It's too late. It's finished. That's you condemn yourself.
Yeah.
You
know?
But
I guess all I'm saying is that for Flavin, you know, the idea of him not having any irony about what he does is about not indulging any of those questions about why he should do
absolutely.
it. So he's absolute about it. There's no deviation from the sense in which it has legitimacy without any kind of question. So, you know, the question of someone's sort of like thinking, you know, they could ask, is it a humour? It's like, no, absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. And also the way you install it, the way you think, there are specific rules. It's like Donald Judd. You have to put the boxes at a certain distance, and it's hard for a normal person to understand why 1 inch more could change the entire thing, but that's why it makes the work important, and that's where is the big difference. You know, the rigor of I don't think Pascali was rigorous, you know, and I think he's one of these artists that was very lucky to die young.
But despite the fact...
No, I truly believe it. I think that a lot of artists, particularly Italian, they don't die too young. They last too long. And he could have done, you could have seen that canon made again and again and again, and maybe with different material, and that would lost completely the aura and everything, because, you know.
So first of all, just to say something about what you've just commented, because once you've said that to me, I sort of did a bit of searching and found this beautiful sentence that exactly accentuates what you're trying to argue about Flavin's seriousness about his work, when he said, one might not think of light as a matter of fact, but I do, and it is as plain and open and direct as art as you will ever find. And I think the use of matter of fact here is really nice, because he's really speaking of light as matter, and as a fact, and
like
as
paint
material.
or color, or so it was a game changer of the space, and is an element that transforms everything more than anything else. So he was very right in that respect.
I think there is a kind of, but I do think there's a sort of, you know, an inbuilt kind of prejudice to the notion of a work of art that includes electricity. You know, because in terms of the transcendent qualities of the dominant mode of making art, painting, for example, it's, you know, how can a work of art be transcendent when it's not on? You know? Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, when there's a power cut, it's kind of like, you know, it's not.
But that's exactly the paradox, I suppose, that lies with Sublime hardware. With that,
but it's also that the electricity has a utilitarian function which bleeds into the work and somehow ruins its metaphysics, because it's kind of not entirely autonomous, that it has, you know, it's connected to something else which gives it a purpose. You know, you can have your Dan Flavin on, but you can use the same plug to use your Hoover. And your Hoover's probably Jeff Koons as well, so it's kind of
I think it was, you go back to the Sublime, the idea of Sublime. Barnett Newman wrote this huge essay on Sublime. I think is a shortcut to, you know, monument to Tatlin. Then you don't question anymore the neon or something like that. You don't question the hardware. You just, it's like, look at the star, you say Tatlin, and that's it. you know, and then, you know, the Sublime of Barnett Newman. It was a way, I think, I don't want to sound cynical, but it was a way to, you know, he realized that it was no more possible to paint like Michelangelo, and they say it's easier to do stripes. But, you know, if you call them, yeah, let's call them Sublime, because that's a way to allow us to do a very simple thing, and
yeah, no, it's true.
And avoid, you know, this heritage that is so heavy in.
But isn't that why that Dan Flavin has no irony? Because if you just say, well, I'm not doing it for any other purpose than putting these things in this order,
yeah.
then you don't have to answer the question. If you have no irony, and you have no further interest in your work other than the schematic production of it, then you don't also have to ask the reason why it's there or whether it kind of pertains to the Sublime. It's like, no, I'm just doing this thing.
Yeah.
You know, it has no. I don't need to discuss Kant to put a load of, you know, things on the wall.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. But there is something quite nice about the idea that actually, you know, maybe you should have called the show Sublime Hopelessness, because maybe the condition of the sublime is that sublime hopelessness.
Yeah.
You know, that when you stand in front of this thing which is supposed to embody this notion of what it is that we all are experiencing, you know, that actually the thing that the sublime begins to sort of represent to us is that it's even hopeless trying to find the sublime.
Yeah.
You know, so even that is a kind of like an approximation. You know, you're just kind of grubbing around like the dung beetle, sort of rolling things around, looking up.
The salvation is to put a title, like Tatlin or something like that. It would be like a Cy Twombly, you know. I think his genius thing was not what he was doing, but the title that he was giving, Lepanto. You know, and there's a scribble on the canvas, and you call it Lepanto. You put the viewer completely out of there's Lepanto.
And they look they look more like.
And then you go to look at it. It's a huge, complicated battle of ships.
What it is, it's like it's a man falling down the stairs with a pencil.
Yeah?
It's the man falling down the stairs with a pencil.
With a pencil, yeah. And that's the thing, you know. I think that's the brilliant. That's why Americans have been so strong in creating this myth, because they apply a very simple or childish gesture to something grandiose, and there is nothing in between. And the two things together are absolutely, you know, because there is no connection.
Can we define sublime in our context? Sorry for being the annoying one in this trio.
No.
Because I think it's a difficult question, and I think that it often gets confused with exactly when we speak of art with the notion of beauty, of extreme beauty, of something. I know, and sometimes we speak of something that is just so absolutely great that cannot be conceived or cannot be put into words or cannot be reduced, or it could be something. But I wonder if you have any thoughts in that sense of how do we, is it something that's just the unquantifiable that becomes so large and so tremendous that it can't be intaken? That's why I suppose earlier I was trying to push to things like sightlessness, or like the fact that these places don't have a home, or that they demand us to play make-believe, or that they are lacking some aspect or another of themselves because they sort of demand us to make a leap. And I mean, you speak about it, and it is interesting to see also the cynical side of it, of that leap that Flavin is asking us to.
Well, I think Sublime is the last step into nothingness, you know. No, it's true. I mean, it's the last step into nothingness. Barnett Newman, if he did a stripe, if he didn't do the stripe, he would do nothing. So it's, Flavin is the same, it's the ultimate thing. The minimum, the most basic element into the light and something to produce the light. So it's just, we are on the Sublime is on the verge of nothingness, and that's what some people went into there.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the other aspect that I wanted to mention here was
Pascal is not Sublime at all. Actually, absorbed light is so matte. You know, it's absolutely the opposite of Sublime.
But it's an interesting idea, isn't it? That if you think about, you know, the trajectory of modernity again, you know, back to my stick rubs. No, not again. Yeah. No, but this idea of saying, you know, that you could say that Sublime, you know, in terms of how it emerges from a religious sense, you know, sort of kind of religious sublime is the divine, isn't it? This kind of sense of this, you know, kind of, you know, a degree of experience which is beyond human control or beyond human scale. And the thing is that, you know, if you think about kind of like at least postmodern relativism, where it's very difficult to have an agreement about anything, we're still somehow sort of discussing this term, which seems to have a theological aspect to it, which doesn't really seem to fit with, say, for example, these things. We kind of discuss these things as being sublime. Kind of like is almost like it's kind of using a religious term for something which seems by its very nature to actually be heretical. You know, to not want that transcendent notion of art as being something beautiful. It's kind of, you know, it's kind of, I mean, you know, there was I think, you know, maybe 20 years, 30 years, no, more than that, 40 years ago, I think when the Tate Gallery bought the Carl Andre equivalent bricks, you know, and I think every newspaper, every tabloid newspaper at least was like, what the fuck are you buying this, you know, £70,000, crazy, you know, every newspaper. But I think because there weren't that many people interested in art then, you know, it certainly wasn't a kind of it hadn't achieved its kind of gentrified saturation that it has now. The difference between then and now is that when you go to the Tate Modern and you get, you know, blown off the causeway next to the water onto a escalator, and you're in the gallery even if you didn't want to be in there. You know, you see these kind of parades of people walking past the Richard Long and the Carl Andre, and every single person will note and say, will have this kind of sense in which these things deserve the idea that it's beautiful, or they deserve to be considered aesthetically. You know, not like what is it there, what is it doing there, why is it there, what the hell is a museum, why is it possible for an artist. So in a sense what's happened is that there's been a seamless transition from questions where the tabloid papers were actually asking the right critical questions, like what is this, what's it doing here, apart from the tabloid, you know, language, which is kind of offensive. But what's happened is that there's a tendency, and I think in a more conservative way, in which the idea of the sublime has come back as a means of an abstracted form of bourgeois love of art, you know, because it has no sort of, you don't need to kind of, you know, if something is beautiful, you know, it's beautiful. And it's kind of, it's an irreducible term that no one can compete with, no one can sort of take it apart. And I think what's odd about it is that when it's applied to things which seem to be so set against it, you know, so, you know, Carl Andre, the idea that it's beautiful, it still perplexes me that could be a condition of appreciation, that it could be a beautiful thing.
Before we open the floor for questions, if anybody has questions, that would be lovely. I just wanted to ask you one more question, and that relates maybe to both of you. I mean, Francesco, you mentioned the Chapman Brothers exhibition at Blaine Southern a few years back, and we were speaking about one particular exhibit that was there, where you've casted these bomber vests, and I think that project seems to be very much invested exactly with a specific, first of all, a technology. We're just talking about being a technician. There's something so technician-like in this kind of project, but also the fact of casting it and making it into a sculpture, into an element. I was wondering if you want to tell us the motivations for making that project, or how does that sort of function then as a sculpture?
But I see also as a sublime.
Absolutely.
It's so to say, but sublime object. Because a suicide vest is something that is made to be destroyed. So there is all the effort. It's a little bit, you know, like in a way with the light, with the neon. The effort to put the neon is disappear when the neon is on, and so it's the same thing. This where.
Well, there's a sublimity to terrorism in terms of the fact that, you know, I mean, there's a kind of a material question about terrorists, which kind of, you know, even emerges from the idea that most terrorists have some kind of claim about their materiality being their nation state or their lack of, or their, you know, their claims about sort of territory, their claims about things. And that obviously, you know, that when they're fighting against an opponent who refuses to actually acknowledge that they exist, they already reside in the realm of the sublime anyway. And so their attack on their enemy, you know, even down to the idea that somehow, you know, the new sort of fear that we have is that terrorists are going to shift from bombs to things that are more pernicious, more biological, more atmospheric. So they're beginning. They already exist in a kind of an immaterial world. They have to intervene into the materiality of our world that they somehow maybe are jealous of, or want, or hate, or, you know, or offended by. And they do it by sublime means. They do it by things which are invisible, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess that we're interested in that notion that how do you know, to try and capture something which has a kind of a kinetic moment to it, which which is, you know, there's a weird, no, so we were just thinking that the idea of making something in bronze is already sort of within the realm of a monument, but to kind of sort of monumentalize a thing petrified before its moment of explosion is a kind of, as you said before, it's kind of like it's the bit before nothing, you know, it's the sublime before nothing. And I just thought, you know, there was something interesting in the idea of trying to memorialize our imminent fear, because it seems to be that that's what, you know, terrorism kind of like activates in us. And also it's kind of functional for us as well, because considering that our, you know, that our kind of our social tranquility, our ability to have art galleries and works of art is predicated upon a kind of systemic violence which we inflict on everyone else on the outside, and we protect ourselves from the divine violence of individuals who come and do things which have no, you know, they have no magnitude of comparison between what we do systemically. So there's this notion of sort of how one little bomb vest can ripple through the ranks of us in such an efficient way, when all of the resources that we marshal against trying to get rid of them have no effect whatsoever, you know. And that's kind of, I guess that's trying to think about stuff like that.
Provocation seemed to be a relevant term often, and a term that's often associated with, well, both, I think, with your practice, often with your curatorial practice, with Pino Pascali, with Dan Flavin, something that's almost a little testing the limits of its viewers. I just wonder, in your view, is that something that you intend to do, or is that something that is just often a result of the sort of subject of your interest, of the kind of investigations that you do? I'm not sure that's an easy one to answer.
I don't think I want to provoke ever. I mean, I think that's no. I don't. I never think. I don't think it's a provoking show. This. I mean, it's.
Well, it's difficult. I mean, it's
their work maybe. It's.
But it's a melodramatic word, isn't it? And it's kind of.
Yeah,
I think it's optimistic to think that, you know, given that the work exists within a kind of a community of people that are kind of, you know, pleasantly provoked by the work, there's a kind of there's a mutual sort of a pantomime going on between the kind of provocative artist and the kind of offended audience, that, you know, that's a kind of a mutual sort of feedback loop. And I think that maybe, you know, again, if you know, is a Dan Flavin provocative? Well, it might be provocative because it kind of underwhelms the viewer in terms of what they might expect a work of art to do, you know, to make them feel better, or to give them a sense in which the world is a really great place. I mean, that's what begins to be interesting in terms of the turn of modernity, when suddenly works of art don't seem to be telling everyone about the kind of the spiritual reckoning of their wellness and the wonderful future that they've got in store. You know, that actually what suddenly art becomes is a bit like, well, you know, the opposite, you know, and that's kind of, so I think the provocation could be, you know, provocation doesn't mean to say that you're being a, you know, I mean, I guess, you know, I was talking about this the other day, you know, that the term when people say, you know, don't bite the hand that feeds you, it's precisely the rules of engagement for an avant-gardist artist to bite the hand that feeds them. And the hand being a kind of a liberal society that allows them a kind of a stage for them to act out their pantomime, you know, and we all clap, you know.
Yeah, and I can't think of a better sign to clap than this. No, just to say, before everybody runs off, thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Jake and Francesco, for sitting this evening. And of course, thank you, Daniela and Amalia and Alma, for facilitating, as always, these really meaningful exhibitions. I hope you stick around for a lovely opening and a drink, and that's it. Thank you.